the EU single market and customs union. Our economics correspondent Andrew Walker reports.
Britain's new trade arrangement with the EU has created new barriers, regulations and paperwork. So far, it's especially British exporters that are affected, and there were widespread reports in January of shipments being turned back at the border. The new figures show a stark decline in trade for January after the end of the Brexit transition period, although the UK's statistics agency advises caution in interpreting them. Businesses are thought to have stockpiled goods in the previous months, and the UK went into a new pandemic-related lockdown, although exports to the rest of the world increased slightly. The lockdown hit the overall economy very hard, a fall of almost 3% in the single month of January. Since then, however, progress with vaccinations is likely to underpin a recovery in activity.
World News from the BBC. The police watchdog in Britain is to investigate the force in London over its handling of an allegation of indecent exposure against an officer who was later arrested on suspicion of kidnap and murder. The watchdog said it would establish if officers responded appropriately to the complaint by staff at a takeaway restaurant. It happened 3 days before 33-year-old Sarah Everard was last seen in London. Human remains have been found in woodland south of the capital. Aung San Suu Kyi's lawyer has ridiculed charges of accepting illegal payments made against his client, Myanmar's deposed leader. The country's new military rulers have accused Ms Suu Kyi of taking $600,000 and 11 kilograms of gold. Her lawyer said the allegations were a joke. He said Ms Suu Kyi had defects, but personal greed was not one of them. Goodwill Zwelithini, the king of the Zulu nation in South Africa, has died from complications arising from diabetes. He was 72. Nomsa Maseko reports from Johannesburg.
King Zwelithini was installed as the 8th monarch of the Zulus in 1971, taking over from his father Cyprian Beguzulu. He leaves behind 6 wives and 28 children. During the apartheid era, King Zwelithini's role was lesser known, though his uncle, Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, often wheeled him out to use Zulu nationalism to show up his political position as the leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party. After South Africa became a democracy, there were times when the Zulu king praised the apartheid government, saying the National Party had built a strong economy and that the ANC government, led by black people, destroyed the gains of the past.
Japan says its own athletes will not be allowed to have a Chinese coronavirus vaccine that's being offered to all competitors at the Tokyo Olympics. The Olympics minister said that was because no Chinese vaccine had been approved for use in Japan. BBC News.
天天在一起，天天用心听，听见台北的声音。FM 93.1，幸福永远属于你。
公民总主笔。
方恩格时间，
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？
谁当家？谁当家？
谁当家？我当家。你当家？我当家。
我当家。
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Welcome to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. I'm your host, Ross Darrell Feingold. Today, our guest is author, journalist, keen observer of Taiwan culture and history, Han Chung. Han, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ross.
You're such an interesting person because you write about Taiwan history a lot and Taiwan culture, and you've spent a lot of your life here, a lot of your childhood here, but in fact, you're not from here. Your family roots are not in Taiwan.
Yeah, they're not. Actually, my parents are from Hong Kong. They grew up in Hong Kong, and then they went to the States for grad school, and then so I was born in the States, and then so we had zero ties to Taiwan.
But how'd you wind up in Taiwan as a child? Your parents were working here?
My dad got a job here, so I came here for the first time in 1987, probably, and then it was a lot of back and forth. Like I would spend some time here, some time there, and then we kind of settled here when I was in like 5th grade, and then so from then on till high school graduation, I was here. So.
What are some fond memories of your childhood in Taipei, especially given that you were not, or your family roots weren't here?
Yeah, it was just like really different culture shock, and it was like learning the language, but like I was young enough to learn pretty quickly, so I was like just getting around the place and, you know, just hanging out in the neighborhood, and, you know,
but did people often assume you were Taiwanese? I mean, you look Chinese, so
right.
You know, it's probably a lot of people. I mean, did people sometimes speak to you just in Mandarin or in Taiwanese dialect, and you had to tell them, hey, I look like I'm from here, but I'm not from here?
Actually, that's more of a problem these days. Like back then, like, because I went back to the States after college, so I've been away for basically like 15, 16 years, and then I come back, and so I feel more distant to the culture and like the language. But like, yeah, so when people assume that, and it's more like socializing these days, you know, like people assume that you're Taiwanese, and then you have to explain that you're not. But my Mandarin is pretty fluent, and I can pass for a Taiwanese, so that even like complicates things even more. So,
nowadays, when you tell people that you have some family roots in Hong Kong, does that get a different reaction? Because Taiwan's supposed to be supporting Hong Kong right now.
Yeah. They always mention the situation and like what's going on.
And you say, I haven't lived in Hong Kong, or my family hasn't lived in Hong Kong.
Right. Actually, I've never lived there, so except for like a 2 months business trip.
Does that kind of deflate people? They're kind of sad. They want to hear like, you know, you're a protester or something like that.
A little bit. Yeah, I think it does. But yeah, I'm just like, you know, I do care about what's going on there, but my family there is not very political, so they're not very involved in that sort of thing. So so in general, we don't really talk about it either.
And being here as an American growing up in Taiwan, did you like the term third culture kid, or is that a term that, you know, cliche, I don't want to be called a third culture kid?
Yeah, I think that term is fine. Like, yeah, it's more multicultural, because like my parents aren't from here, and then I grew up in the States, and then I had to come here and learn Mandarin, and then learn how to read and write, and then kind of like assimilate into the culture. So yeah, I think it's pretty appropriate, because it's harder to figure out. Like as young, I think it's still easier to assimilate when you're younger. So like you could really like pass for just being Taiwanese, whereas like as you're older, you have your own identity and like things like that. So it's a bit more culture shock now. But then I think I blend in pretty well. So in general,
when you were growing up in Taiwan, did you do a lot of writing as a child? Were you into writing or reading? Because you know you eventually became a journalist,
right?
Did you do a lot of writing as a child?
Not really, actually. Like I actually stumbled across that. Yeah, I was mostly, I mean, I wrote stories as a kid, but that was about it. I never thought that writing was my strong suit, because of like, I think it's mostly a language problem. I came here not knowing any Chinese, so then I learned it from scratch. And even though I did go to like local school and I had to write in Chinese, I never felt like fully comfortable with it. But then when I went back to the States, it was like, I don't know if my English is that good, because I've been in Taiwan for 10 years. So I was never really confident in it. So I never really explored that. Like, so it was more art and music that like I was more drawn to.
When you went back to the States for university after growing up here, did you tell people I'm from Taiwan, or did you always tell people I'm from the States? Oh, by the way, I happen to live in Taiwan for a good part of my childhood. How do you address that with people?
Yeah, interestingly, I think back then I would say I was from Taiwan, because otherwise it would add to that cultural confusion again. Because if you just said you were from the States, people would just think, oh, he's like Asian American, he's born and raised here, and then they'll interact with you differently. Whereas if you be like, okay, I'm from Taiwan, then you get more leeway in like not being able to like fit in immediately into the culture.
You're talking socially.
Socially, yeah.
I thought you were going to say you use that as a way to like get extra time on your school projects with the professors.
Yeah, no, I didn't do that.
I'm an international student. Yeah. I need some more time, professor.
Right. Yeah, but like I had no idea that my English level and like anything like that, because like I was just here, and so it's pretty interesting. So that's why like writing never actually came up.
And then eventually, though, you went to the University of Missouri for a master's in journalism, and that's a highly regarded journalism school, actually. how did you wind up going for a master's in journalism?
Actually, so I started my career as a graphic designer. So I worked I worked in a luxury carpet company for 5 years in New York City, and we were selling carpets to like Brad Pitt and like the Prince of Saudi Arabia. It was like pretty crazy stuff, and I got to travel a lot for that. And so I won a camera at a company raffle that I wasn't supposed to be at. So it was pretty interesting. I was just on business trip and visiting the office in Hong Kong, and they invited me to their party. And I won the camera in that raffle. So I started like traveling and taking pictures. Like actually, yeah, the camera pushed me to start doing that kind of stuff. And you know, like taking pictures led to writing about the pictures, which led to blogging, which led to like writing. And then basically I got sick of just sitting in an office all day, which was pretty much what graphic design is, even though it's still creative. Like, so I decided I wanted to change. And so yeah, winning that camera led to me eventually quitting my job and going back to school.
Yeah, well, that's certainly inspiring for anyone who's thinking of changing a career, that it's not too late, and even something like winning a camera could prompt someone to really dramatically change their career path and their life.
Yeah, I wasn't happy with the job for a while, but I just didn't know what else to do, so I just stayed there until I figured it out. But
tell us about studying journalism formally, and the reason why I ask that is frankly, a lot of journalists, commentators, program hosts like myself, even we don't necessarily have formal training, and sometimes journalists learn on the job. But you actually took classes in journalism school. What do they teach you, and what's the value of getting a formal education in journalism?
Actually, yeah, I think it's a pretty good introduction, because I just wanted a career change and I didn't know like where to start, so that really like prepped me for it. I think like people were doing masters, like there was more the professional track and the academic track, so you could choose one, and I was more doing the professional one. And actually the school was pretty hands-on. Like we actually worked at the local newspaper, which was run by the school. So our stuff was in the student newspaper, so it was actually being read. And for grad students, like it was like we had to get there early if we had no journalism experience, and be thrown into this boot camp thing where the first day you'll start working at the newspaper. And so that was really like nerve-wracking. So I just sat there for 5 days. I was like, I don't know how to get stories, I don't know what to write about. And and my first story was having to write an obituary where I had to like talk to these people who just lost their relative and loved one. So I was like super like just like anxious. It was like really stressful. So I think that was like really what like I benefited me from, like, and it's all the opportunities that you get through the school. You get to try cool equipment, you get to go to like cool workshops and meet like real professionals in the field that are very well known. So it's a lot of it is that, but like honestly, like a lot of what I do now I learned on the job, like after graduation. So it really depends on your personality, I think.
What about things like journalist ethics? Is that something that, because so many people look at the media and what people say on the air or what they write, and the public, right? They're looking or watching and questioning the media and saying, how could the author or the host say such things, or they don't do research, it's so sloppy or it's provocative. What did they teach you in the journalism school about ethical issues?
I think they were pretty strict about it. Like, so we had a whole class on ethics, actually. So actually for that I used Apple TV's like 3D animations as like a case study. And so we did talk a lot about it. But when you get out in the real world, your first job, your editor says like, if it bleeds, it leads, and then you're like, okay, because you got to sell newspapers, and then you need to like figure out the boundaries of like how far you go before. And I've managed to keep, like, I haven't done anything I'm not very proud of or anything. So I think I've managed to keep within the boundaries.
And when you encounter younger reporters now, do you find yourself sharing with them some of that knowledge you learned in school, or is it more just the knowledge you've learned on the job? Do you say to them, well, actually in my journalism class back in master's school, this is how they told us to do it?
I think it's mostly from experience. Like really, like sitting there and doing it is really different, I think. So yeah, definitely more from experience, I think, because I was just as clueless as the young journalist when I got out of journalism school, actually.
Even after getting the master's?
Yeah, even after getting the master's. Like, because if you're in a professional track and you really need to be in this like high pressure newsroom. I mean, I was doing features when I worked in the newsroom, so it wasn't like, but my first job was a daily where, you just had to go out and cover car crashes, and I had not much.
There wasn't a car crash class in journalism school. How to write about, how to go to the hospital and interview the victims.
Not that I didn't really focus on that, but that turned into my first I think in school, like you get more freedom to do what you want, and then you get out and you're thrust into like in school I could choose not to cover car crashes, but once you get out, you work in a newsroom, you're the like rookie reporter, you get those assignments, and then you gotta.
Well, one of your first jobs as a journalist when you finished your master's degree was in what we could call a cowboy town. You were working in a small town in Wyoming,
right?
Of all places, Han, why did you decide to go to a small town in Wyoming, especially having grown up in Taiwan and being a Chinese American? You kind of don't really fit in small town America.
Not at all. I mean, I was kind of curious because, I lived in New York for 8 years, and then Missouri has like a pretty big like Asian student population as like a big college town. So I wanted to like see what the rest of like real like rural America was like. And I got some like a taste of it through, I worked at this thing called the Missouri Photo Workshop, and it would be just photographers would choose a town and then spend 2 weeks there, and then they would shoot a story.
But 2 weeks is a little different than moving there and living there.
Right. Actually, I was on my way. I was on a road trip to Yellowstone, actually, and I passed through Rollins for lunch, and I noticed I was looking for a job, so I saw the newspaper was hiring. So like, I'll go visit the newspaper, and had a really good chat with the editor, and he's like, hey, if you ever need a job, just give me a call. And I forgot about it. 3 months later, I needed a job. So
there you were.
I called him.
Rawlings,
I was running out of money, so I just called him. I was like, hey, you about that job? He's like, yeah, come over. So
you packed up your horse and
I packed up my horse and then like
put on your
my
cowboy
carriage
hat.
and just ended up like. Just got there, and then I started.
At the risk of being simplistic, would culture shock be the adequate way to describe what it was like to move to small town America, especially in the West, the kind of cowboy Wyoming?
No.
Is
It's
there a
more
better
than
phrase?
a culture shock. It's like
Yeah.
never nothing I've ever seen, actually. Like because I grew up in big cities, like Taipei. And I've never lived. When I went to Missouri, like Columbia, Missouri, which was like 100,000, I was like, oh, that's the countryside. And then you go to Rollins, which is 9,000.
For our listeners, could you describe where in Wyoming, or where it is in relation to the nearest big city? Where exactly were you?
It's like southern central Wyoming. So I was the closest significant town was Laramie, which is where the University of Wyoming was, and that's a 2-hour drive away. So. Our whole population was probably like, our county is like, there was like 10,000 people in there total, and we had a town of like 3 people. We had a town of like 1 resident. So
It sounds like ghost towns.
Pretty much. And the closest major city was Denver, which was a 4-hour drive away. So if you wanted,
that's if
like,
it's not snowing, right?
Yeah. Actually, I've been trapped on the highway multiple times because so we
and was the newspaper's coverage just that county of 10,000, or actually you were covering a much wider area?
We were covering just the county, so that was really interesting because we got to go like really local. So we were like interviewing people's grandmothers, like, what'd you do this week? And, this kid got a scholarship to somewhere. We had one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. So no college. So high school football was like all the rage there. So,
you had to cover that as well.
I had to cover that, high school basketball, what the library programs that they put on for kids, and like all
were
that
any books banned at this library? Dare I ask?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah.
So fairly open-minded, even though we generally think of this as a conservative part of America.
Right. Yeah, I think it's more about like community, like people are conservative there, but they're also very friendly and welcoming if you're willing to be here and make a difference.
And how long did it take for you to really fit in with the community?
Took a while, actually. Took maybe a year or two, maybe a year. The first year, it was really hard making friends. Everybody already knew everybody, and the biggest industry was like the oil refinery and the jail, so like state prison. So it's really hard to find.
Did you go interview some of the prisoners as well?
I did, actually, yeah. So
and were these people from the area also?
Yeah, mostly from the area.
Who were in prison?
Yeah. We actually had the historic prison and an actual prison, so I did plenty of stories on both of them.
So you're an expert in corrections about
the
American correction system.
Pretty much.
As well. What's your fondest memory of that experience? Is it just writing, or was there some cultural event you participated in, like the annual cow something?
Yeah. It was more like being. Well, actually, that was the first event I covered. Was the cow plop? That's what we called it. So,
and what is the annual cow plop?
So these that's like one of the biggest like community events. They actually have this big field in the middle of the town, and they draw a grid in it, and then they put some cows in it, and people bet on which square they're gonna plop on. So you just have these people there. There's a band playing, and these people are like, like drinking and eating and just screaming like poop, poop, poop there. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is real culture
Did you
shock.
get some good photos of the poop?
I have some really good photos of the poop. So yeah.
Did you bet on it? Did you make anybody else?
No, I didn't. But yeah, I think that was the culture shock. And then that was, and then after that, I think just the fondest memory is going to all these events. So people just expected me to be there, and of course not, like being Asian, I kind of stood out. So they knew like wherever I was, and I made sure that I was outside all the time, because like being an outsider and being a journalist, people don't really trust journalists, and then I'm not from here. I don't look like them.
Yeah, you
so,
sure didn't look like you were from there.
So I tried to be out there all the time. I was in the schools. I was at all the festivals. I was at everything. So people really knew that, like, I'm like serious about this. Like, I want to, like, I'm here for the community. Because a lot of journalists come to these small towns and they just think I'm going to start stuff up. I'm going to like...
They're going to investigate the local corruption or something like
corruption, and then everybody hates them. So like you got to do community journalism is very sensitive, especially from a foreign outsider. So yeah.
And you also, another interesting aspect of your life is you lived for a while in Mongolia.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, that's what I did between quitting my carpet job and grad school, actually. So yeah, I actually just went there on a whim. I was visiting my sister in Beijing. She was working there as like a artist, and I was like, I want to go somewhere. I just looked at where the closest country to Beijing was, and it was Mongolia.
It wasn't the cold weather that attracted you.
No,
or the food or the cuisine.
No, actually, I didn't know much about it. I just looked and I was like, that's pretty close. I can get there. Actually, it wasn't very close, but because I took the train there.
Oh, the slow train.
Yeah. So it took like 20 something hours to get
of course,
to Ulaanbaatar.
The Republic of China and the Republic of China and Taiwan has a complex relationship with Mongolia. What are some misunderstandings you've encountered in Taiwan? Like when you mentioned to people that you've spent time in Mongolia, what are some misunderstandings people in Taiwan might have about Mongolia that you could share with us?
It's interesting because politically, whenever I bring that up, people assume I went to Inner Mongolia, which is part of the People's Republic of China.
And then you have to say, no, Mongolia,
it's
a whole other country.
I went to Mongolia, and then they were like, oh, is that still part of China? I'm like, no, there's a part of Inner Mongolia is part of China. And I also went there, actually. But I spent more time
been a country since like 1920. Right?
Yeah. So it's been independent for a long time. So
not according to the ROC Constitution.
Oh, right. That's true. Yeah, and I think what else? Mongolian hot pot, Mongolian barbecue. They don't eat that there.
So it's a stereotype here.
Yeah, actually, Mongolian barbecue was invented in Taiwan and then popularized within the U.S. And then when I was there, American guy had just opened a Mongolian barbecue in Mongolia. Yeah, so it came full circle.
But people
I guess,
here think it actually comes from Mongolia.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Yeah. Now, my sources, because I do a little bit of my own investigative journalism, Han, tell me that you do some singing of Mongolian folk songs.
Yeah. I'm still working on it, but it's like I bought a horsehead fiddle actually a couple months last year. I haven't really learned how to play it yet, but
I'm gonna have to ask you to sing a little bit in Mongolian. Could you do that for us? A few bars?
I can't really do it properly yet, but it sounds like. But now, if they do it really well, you can hear like the overtones.
But what you just sang, is that actually words? It's lyrics, or is it more just like a kind of like a background to carry the tune?
They do it both ways. Like a lot of times they just do that, but they can act like the really pro ones can actually put words into it, which I am not able to do yet.
Because it almost sounded more like a religious kind of chant rather than lyrics.
Yeah, actually it is. And you go on YouTube, you can see a lot of videos of like them just sitting in this like grassland, and he's just like playing his fiddle and just going like but like there are other ones where they actually sing lyrics, and that's even harder. So I'm not at that level yet.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk some more with our fascinating guest, one of Taiwan's most prominent authors, journalists in the English language, Han Chung. You're listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station.
Loving can hurt. Loving can hurt sometimes, but it's the only thing that I know. When it gets hard, you know it can get hard sometimes. It is the only thing that makes us feel alive. We keep this love in a photograph. We made these memories for ourselves, where our eyes are never closing, our hearts are never broken, and time's forever frozen still. So you can keep me inside the pocket of your ripped jeans, holding me closer till our eyes meet. You won't ever be alone. Wait for me to come home. Loving can heal. Loving can mend your soul. And it's the only thing that I know. I swear it will get easier. Remember that with every piece of you. And it's the only thing we take with us when we die. We keep this love in its photograph. We made these memories for ourselves, where our eyes are never closing, our hearts were never broken, time's forever frozen still. you kissed me under the lamppost back on 6th Street, hearing you whisper through the phone, wait for me to come home.
如有长照服务需求、长照特别扣除额问题，请拨打1966长照专线，5分钟内通话免付费。一通电话让长期照顾管理专员协助申请长期照顾服务及解答长期照顾特别扣除额相关问题。以上内容由台北市政府卫生局提供。
亲爱的朋友，您还在吸烟吗？快拿着健保卡到戒烟门诊或拨打戒烟专线0800636363。提醒您，最近兴起的电子烟、加热烟，因为没有浓浓的烟臭味，就被认为无害。其实已经证实，新兴烟品都有二手烟及三手烟的危害，甚至还有爆炸的风险。我是义工蔡依林，所有烟品都 get out。我拒烟，我骄傲。
家己电台家己主持的。大家好，我是郭文铁，我伫台北广播电台。
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？谁当家？谁当家？当家？我当家？你当家？我当家？
我当家？
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Our guest today is Han Chung, author of the Taiwan in Time column at the English Language Taipei Times. Han, who came up with the idea for Taiwan in Time as a regular column?
I think I did. Yeah, because I work at the Taipei Times as a features reporter, so I guess my editor wanted us to each think of a column to do, and I guess actually I knew nothing. I didn't know much about Taiwan history because they didn't teach that stuff when I was growing up here very much. So I actually started in Wyoming. When I was in Wyoming, I was doing this Rewind Rollins. Mm-hmm. So I always have to have the same consonant. But Rewind Rollins column where, because I was had a really good relationship with the museum. So they had, our newspaper was over almost more than 100 years old, so I could just dig through the archives. So I started doing that there. And that ended up in a book about Wyoming's influential people in Wyoming. And that got pretty popular as everybody had someone who was related, who was in there. And so I just thought that, I would start that when I got here. Mm-hmm. And keep doing it because I actually like sitting in basements looking at old newspapers.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna ask you, how do you do the research, or what kind of challenges do you have in writing a column about specific events? Because a lot of the columns are about something that happened on a specific day. Mm-hmm. It could be 20 years ago, or it could be 50 years ago, or even longer. But a lot of your columns are about very specific events, and it requires research to share with your readers some of these facts. How do you go about doing that?
I think, I'm mostly in the library because at first I tried to interview people, and it was just, I think it was a lot more time consuming for a weekly column, I guess. And a lot of these people aren't alive anyways. So if you really want, I wanted to use my Chinese language skills so I could read the original documents and firsthand eyewitness accounts and those kind of things. So eventually I gravitated to that because I thought that was more, I guess it's not more valuable, but more, it's different. It's something that bringing these dead people's words back to life and giving it meaning in the a modern context was interesting. So I ended up spending most of my time, every Thursday I'm in the library all day looking at different at the National Central Library in particular, because they have pretty much everything that was ever published about Taiwan. So
for some of our listeners who've not spent that effort at the library and may not be familiar with the newspapers that existed at the time, Share us a little bit about what these primary sources are. What were the newspapers that existed that you're looking at if you're writing about something, say, from the 20s or the 30s?
There were a lot of there were newspapers like the Taiwan Nichi Shimpo and like things like that, and they generally, until the 1930s or 40s, when Japanese imperialism really started like getting serious, like they let people publish Chinese newspapers, so a lot. So but those are pretty like, yeah, you gotta like really like go through them, and they're just big books in the 6th floor of the library. So
actual hard copies
actually. Yeah.
How come these things aren't on microfilm?
I think they are as well. I think they are as well, but they're also they're reproduced, like they're photocopies of the newspapers, and there's just like books and books of them, and it's easier to just flip through it than actually have to like, you know, load the microfilm or have to find like load the web page. It's like it's easier to just flip through the pages if you're not exactly sure which date this thing happened on. It was like June, and then like if you're really sure, then you can load like, you know, a microfilm. But yeah.
And how does the writing style differ back then compared to the way newspapers in Taiwan are written today?
Totally different. Actually, it's really hard to read. If you talk about the 20s, it's like, it's a lot of it was more closer to like classical Chinese, a lot of it, so it's really hard to decipher sometimes. And then when you get into the KMT era, it's so like just official speak, and you have to like praise Chiang Kai-shek and like mention that, you know, they're doing this for the greater good of like all the people in the country, and
including in China.
Yeah, including and all that. So you really have to decipher that reading, that kind of writing, because, you know, it wasn't straightforward journalism, it was state approved journalism, so like you really had to read between the lines and like things like that. So.
You mentioned some of the challenges with interviewing people. Sometimes people have passed away, so it's difficult to find witnesses to certain events. But when you're writing something about more recent events, something that may have happened, say, in the 70s or the 80s, are people in Taiwan generally open to talking about significant historical or cultural events, or are they also still reluctant to open up to a journalist?
I think most people are pretty happy to talk about it. I think I haven't really been turned down for anything like historically related, but I think in the 90s it was really different, because I just wrote about the widows of the 228 incident. So it was this researcher who was going around in the early 90s like trying to find these widows of like their husbands died during or after the 228 incident. So they're trying to find these people, and they refused to be recorded. They were really scared. They were like looking around and be like, am I going to get in trouble for talking to you? And that was the 90s. Like, it was martial law was over, but this fear was still there. So but nowadays, not really. I think everybody I've met has been pretty like willing to talk about it. And I mean, if not, like I can usually find some historical source that like oral histories are like pretty big with the Academia Sinica and then like so can always go to those.
Yeah. You know, a lot of your columns are about somewhat sad or somber events related to either the colonial period or the martial law period. You mentioned 228, but sometimes you write about some interesting and entertaining historical or cultural events that occurred in Taiwan. Share with us something entertaining or interesting that you've written about in the Taiwan in Time column.
Like not sad ones?
Yeah, not sad, Han.
Let's see. Yeah, I've written so many of these. I think not sad one. One really interesting one was rock fights in Taiwan, actually. I mean, it's still kind of sad, but like it's more ridiculous than sad. Like, you know, like the different groups, immigrants from different parts of China just never got along, the Zhangzhou and the Quanzhou, and like so for many years and during the Qing Dynasty and during Dragon Boat Festival, they would get together and each like stand in a line and like hurl giant rocks at each other for like an hour or something. And like
did they do this out of great dislike, or at some point it just became or was there a dispute, or it just became a tradition?
It became a tradition. Like first it was just out of, we were doing this to settle a dispute, but like it turned into like every year Dragon Boat Festival, like two villages who disliked each other would just get together and throw rocks at each other, and that would like settle their frustrations throughout the whole year. So it turned into this ritualistic thing.
And what became of the people who were injured by the flying rocks?
They were just dragged back to the village and treated, and like sometimes they rushed back, and there were like accounts of like the women would hand the rocks to the men who would like throw them, and it was a really like
Taiwan has a good reputation for equality. Fortunately, we even have a female president.
Right. So it's a very
it's a tradition. Women are in leadership roles.
Right. So there was that, and let's see what else. I think it's to me it's really fun to read like the government propaganda and the language and like things like that back then too. And there was like recently wrote about this drive for people to have fewer kids, which is like
and
really contrasting.
What year did that occur? What period was that?
This was like the 60s and 70s, and then into the 80s. They because first they wanted people to have as many kids as like possible to support the war effort, like take back China, and then
you needed more boys to serve in the military.
And then someone finally realized that we can't support this, we can't sustain this. So it was really interesting because the government was against it, but they knew they had to do it, so they just let people like promote it on the side. And
so how many children were they recommending that families have?
First it was like
stop at how many?
Stop at 3, and then like 2 is just good enough. So you have like 两个孩子恰恰好 was like kind of came from that era. And also like the times are changing. Before you just had as many as possible, and they were talking about like they tried to promote like the burden that like like society's getting more competitive. You can't send 5 kids to the Bushiman and like things like that. So but that backfired, and now Taiwan needs to raise its population rate. So I think that was a interesting one to write about too.
And Tomb Sweeping Day, or Qingmingjie, is coming up. Did you ever write anything related to Tomb Sweeping Day?
I actually did a whole I did a whole like history of Qingmingjie. So let me look at my notes here. So actually it's going back to those two groups, or multiple groups, the Hakka, the two groups of like Fujian. Like they just didn't like each other, and they were always fighting. And sometimes and the fights often happened before festivals because they needed to buy supplies, and like they were fighting over meat and rice and things to prepare the festival. So they started actually separating their days. So like so you have Qingmingjie on this day, I'll have Qingmingjie on that day. So I mean, there were different some say that the government made them do it to stop them from fighting, and some say that they just hated each other so much that I don't want to see you at the market, so we'll have it on this day. And and doing Qingmingjie, like Tomb Sweeping Day on the same day, really didn't happen until recent years. Like after the KMT took over, they wanted like a unified Tomb Sweeping Day, and they would hold this ceremony to like worship the Yellow Emperor, and like facing our like homeland that we lost, and like that kind of stuff. So
having done some research on Tomb Sweeping Day, do you find that it's a festival that, especially with younger generations, that they feel connected to, that they're knowledgeable about, or do you feel this is a festival that some of the knowledge is starting to get lost as time goes on?
I think a lot of people won't do it on their own accord. Like it's kind of being lost. Like people my age or younger, a lot of them just do it because their family calls them to do
They
it.
say their parents are going, so they have to go.
Yeah. So they have to go. Some don't even really do it anymore. So it's not. I think it is kind of fading as a festival, as like ancestor worship, or like you're not really that tight of a family unit anymore. And so a little bit of that is going away.
Do you think there's some danger there that the ancestors might get upset? I know you've researched and looked at and written about some of the other kind of the ghosts and the occult kind of religious issues in Taiwan.
Right. Yeah, actually, they might get upset. And like I did a story on like a ghost wedding before. And
what's a ghost wedding for people who are not familiar with this practice?
It's when someone marries a dead person for whatever reason. Traditionally it was females. When they die, if they're unmarried, they don't have like a place on the family altar, so they try to find her a husband, and so the husband would marry this dead person. And since men could have multiple wives back then, it wouldn't really matter anyways, so it was just like giving her a place so she could like rest in the afterlife. And modern day, often like if it happens, it's usually if your loved one dies and you never got to marry her or him, and so you tied a knot in like a symbolic thing. Who performs
this ceremony?
There are Taoist priests who still do these ceremonies
in Taiwan in 2021.
Yeah. It's getting pretty rare. The Taoist priest was telling me that people really don't do it anymore, and if they don't,
I'm surprised that they don't do it anymore.
And if they do it, they don't want people to record it. So this was a really rare opportunity where I was able to like go in there, and he talked about like these things are just dying out. But what the interesting thing I got from that was a lot of young people were still scared to go to it. So I think they're still pretty superstitious. This just still runs in it. So, you better worship your ancestors. I think that's kind of in the same vein, I guess.
Did you actually get to witness the wedding, or you were only able to interview the Taoist priest?
No, I did. I got to witness. It was actually part of like a performance piece by this Korean-American performance artist, Maria Yoon. She married 50 people and things and animals in 50 states. And she finished the U.S., so she wanted to marry something overseas. And she heard that people were marrying dead people in China and Taiwan. She was like, I'm going to do that. So she came here. But the ceremony was real. We actually got a Taoist priest. We got like everything. And he was well-versed in how to do it. So it was as close as the real thing as one would ever get to see.
Did you bring a gift to the couple?
Oh no, I don't think I did.
They might be upset with you.
Yeah, they might be. Maybe. I gotta watch my luck these days.
And you're also an artist.
Yeah, actually, I am. It's interesting because I've been like I went to art school. I did design for many years, but I didn't start really making art until last year. So it was like something. I think it's just something just creative conduit just opened up. And
certainly I think in the time of COVID-19, a lot of people are finding new interests, especially to the extent people were working from home.
Yeah, so I just started drawing, and I just do these like really like intricate street scenes of Taipei mostly.
Any exhibitions upcoming of your artwork?
Not yet, because I'm doing them really slowly, because I only do one when I feel like it. But like I think it's like pretty fun, pretty soothing, and people seem to like it. So
we're almost out of time, Han, but very quickly, for people who are interested in learning more about Taiwan history, researching it, besides reading your column, which I hope people read Han's column almost every week in the Taipei Times, what else could people do? What other resources could people look to for information about Taiwan, accessible information about Taiwan history?
Yeah, that's really... that's a good question. Like it's really hard to get like the history is so complicated that it's really hard to get like a primer of like what's going on. And the thing is, like almost every book about Taiwan will have to explain the history for anything to make sense. So I would suggest like you really like people really just pick a topic they're interested in, like festivals or 228 or I want to learn about even animals or like different like Taiwanese pop culture or anything like that, and go from there. And usually they'll always provide an overview of Taiwanese history, and I think that's a better way to get into it than trying to, tackle the whole thing, because there's also different viewpoints and different perspectives, and some people still don't agree on it today. So it's so you really have to get out there and dig in and kind of look for yourself, but start somewhere you're interested in and go from there.
Well, thanks for that great perspective on learning about Taiwan history. Our guest today has been Han Chung, author of the Taiwan in Time column in the Taipei Times. Han, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.